Good morning. Everybody hear me? Welcome, everyone. I have some good news. In September, you're going to have a new leader for this program. I guess I'm a leader, I don't know. And Eldon and I. This started about 5 years ago. Don Branson and I think Russell Johnson said, would you and Eldon and Russ Warren head up the men's coffee? Well, we got started and we were going along all right, and Russ, like Bojangles' dog, just up and died on us. And we missed him. So we've been involved in this thing for about 5 years, and that's a long time. So Eldon and I are ready to step down, and we got a team coming. Al Goethals, Dan Balfour, and Fred Beck are going to head up this program. And they're all good people who know a lot of good people. And they've all three been speakers here. So I'm glad that my tenure is over. I don't know about Eldon, but so you, starting in September, you will have those three guys, and please, if you see them, welcome them and tell them that I didn't break their arm when I twisted it. I twisted it slowly and easy, but I didn't break their arms. But I look forward to having them here, and I thank all of you who have been speakers and all of you who show up every Friday morning. So that's that. Our speaker next month is Fred Beck, who's going to talk about Rommel in the desert. So look forward to that. And now I want to thank Tom Maxwell, who is going to introduce our speaker, his friend. So I'll let Tom take it over here. Thank you all.
Thanks, John. So my friend Ron McNeil would like you to know that he's a retired Marine Corps officer most of all. He served as an artillery officer and an infantry officer. For the last 14 years on active duty, he was a lawyer practicing criminal law and serving primarily as a prosecutor. After Ron retired from the Marine Corps, he joined the Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs Section, say that 10 times, Criminal Division, U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. For 20 years, he prosecuted domestic drug trafficking organizations and international drug trafficking organizations. In the international cases, he supervised complex criminal investigations and prosecuted significant international narcotics traffickers in U.S. federal courts using various types of evidence, including foreign wiretap evidence, cooperating witnesses, and cocaine lab seizures. He worked with the DEA and FBI agents, foreign law enforcement agents, and prosecutors in Mexico, South America, and Central America. In the Department of Justice, he had a top secret SCI security clearance. While in DOJ, he received 3 Assistant Attorney General's awards, 1 for Special Initiative, 1 for Transnational Criminal Enforcement, and 1 for Distinguished Service. He received an additional 11 DOJ awards. The award for Special Initiative was very significant. Ron, along with a colleague, developed a plan to go after international drug traffickers, extradite them to the U.S., and prosecute them in our federal courts. Prior to his creation of this plan, federal drug prosecutors only focused on domestic drug trafficking organizations. After this plan was implemented, he supervised 23 federal narcotics prosecutors in his office in cases involving 25 different countries. Ron has told me that he will not leave the building until he has answered all your questions, so let's welcome Ron McNeil.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? If any time you can't hear me, jump up and down, wave your hands, whatever you want to do. I really appreciate the invitation to come here and share information about what we're doing in the war against drugs, and especially the international aspect of it. So you'll hear a lot of insights that I'll be sharing with you. I also want to, and I do this for every presentation I give on this topic, I want you to all realize how important and dedicated law enforcement officials are in going after drug trafficking. It's still a tremendous priority. I've worked with local police, I've worked with all sorts of agents. Every trial I had, every case I had either the DEA agent or an FBI agent with me. And sometimes I had task forces where I'd have several different agencies involved. So they're dedicating their time, and many of them are risking their lives, and you'll get a sense of that when we talk a little bit more. So I'm really appreciative of that, and I want everybody to understand that this presentation is not about me. It's really about the team, the group, everybody I worked with to get the job done and accomplished. What Tom said is actually really correct. I want to stay here and talk once my presentation is over, and I want to answer all your questions, and I mean that very sincerely. I'm going to mention some topics that may trigger in your mind the desire to ask questions about it, so I'll be happy to do that. Before I start giving some information to you, I want to ask you all a question. I'd like you to raise your hand. How many of you have watched TV and seen NCIS as a TV show? Okay. The reason I ask you that is before it became popular, I was the criminal law advisor at NCIS headquarters for 2 years, my last 2 years in active duty. It was obviously challenging. I was giving legal advice to agents all over the world and also the executives and the leadership involved in NCIS. I want to mention just one thing about my time at NCIS. How many of you remember a movie called Donnie Brasco? It involved an FBI undercover agent with the mafia. Have you ever heard of that? His name is Joseph Pistone. Well, I had an opportunity to spend time with him, and I just want to share it very quickly. So at NCIS, we decided that we wanted to have an undercover agent section. And so I tracked down Joseph Pistone to see if he'd come and talk with us for a couple hours, and he did. And he was in the mob for acting as an undercover agent for 5 years. Just think about that. And think about all the concerns and anxiety he had over that time period. As a result of his work, there were 200 indictments against mafia guys and 100 convictions. And the thing that most interested me when I was talking with him is I said, okay, when somebody comes out of jail, I knew that he would be notified, so he'd be on alert about his personal safety. So I said, well, what did you do? Did you have a gun? He said, I always had a gun, but he said, I was most worried about somebody coming up and stabbing me with a knife. And that really surprised me. And he said, I really feel comfortable using my gun, but I also was concerned about people getting too close to me. So he did a great job, and we respect him for it. Just as a quick comment, for my domestic cases, I worked with DEA agents, and, as I said, and I also worked with people who were undercover agents, DEA agents who were undercover agents. And I can't tell you how much I respected what they did and what they were facing. They would often tell me that every day when they woke up, they'd say to themselves, am I going to live another day? And they would often meet, understandably, in, say, deserted or abandoned warehouses with other bad guys. And they always worried that when they went to those meetings, that they'd never come out. They were always concerned that they were going to be found out. So I have tremendous respect for all those people I worked with undercover. Okay, I want to, in this presentation, I want to focus on cocaine. And I know that fentanyl is a big problem, but I just want to make a quick statement about fentanyl. How do we get fentanyl in the United States? Well, long story short is China. China sends the precursor chemicals that are needed to form fentanyl. And in addition to that, they also sent the pressers. They actually create the pills to people in Mexico, the bad guys in Mexico. and then people in Mexico would put it all together, and then, as we all know, ship the pills in various ways. So it's quite a dangerous situation, and there's a lot of publicity because of the fact that so many people are dying. It's understandable. And one of the problems I see, just as an observer, is that a kilo of cocaine, and you're going to see pictures of that, stands out so easily, but it's so easy to get small pills into our country, and that's one of the problems we're facing. I just want to mention to you about the priority of cocaine. Cocaine is still a major problem. In fact, it's growing. It's getting bigger. Let me read something from, this is from DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment that just came out 3 months ago. Last year, cocaine production in Colombia alone increased by 1,000 tons. 1,000 tons. Yielding a supply worth at $66.6 billion. I mean, the amount of money involved with these drug trafficking organizations are phenomenal. The year before, the total was $43.5 billion. So you can see cocaine still continues to be a problem. Estimates suggest that there may be 6 to 10 million people in the United States still using and abusing cocaine. Okay. I want to show a bunch of pictures. I'm going to go through them as quickly as I can, just give you an idea of what we're looking at. And then after it, I'll start the substantive part of my presentation. And I'll start this now. Obviously, you see a map. The pink area is the country of Colombia. Up to the far right, you'll see the island of Puerto Rico. I spent a year as an assistant U.S. attorney in Puerto Rico prosecuting drug cases during my time in the Department of Justice. So I'm going to start using the slides. Okay, cocoa leaves. Where does cocaine come from? This is kind of interesting, and unfortunately, it's a sad scenario. It comes from a cocoa plant. So these leaves are produced 6 times a year. And people in Colombia, the peasants and people who are being abused by drug trafficking organizations, cut the leaves off these trees and they cut them up into small pieces. And here's the next step. There's a 2-step process before we get to the cocaine we see in the United States. This is called the base cocaine lab. Look at this thing. All those drums have chemicals in them. I'm not going to go over all the chemicals because I can't remember them all, but so that's the first step. So when those leaves get cut up and they're exposed to those chemicals, then what we see is a slush, kind of a brownish tan color. This is a typical cocaine lab base. I think you can see the lab in the middle. Remember, this is in the jungles of Colombia. The thing that's really interesting to me is far left, you see it says cocoa farming, and then above it says obstacles. What they do is the bad guys, they have the labs there and they try to make it impossible for the Colombian army to go after them. And so they leave trees standing up so the helicopters can't land there. This is the final lab production, and you can see cocaine is white and it's put in kilos. And I'll show you that in a minute. You see a man on the right. He's a lieutenant colonel in the Colombian army. I used him in my trials. This guy was unbelievable. He and his army teams would go into the jungles by helicopter and try to capture the FARC, which is what we're going to talk about, and also grab the labs. And this is what he's done here. He's grabbed a cocaine lab. Here's a kilo of cocaine. A kilo of cocaine is 2.2 pounds. 2.2 pounds. Drug traffickers down in Colombia, they want to make sure that when they send it to the United States, that they can account for whose kilo is going where. And so they come up with different names. This says RAM. You see this. This picture, I want to say I've sent or used many of these pictures in my trials to educate the jury. If you see the town in the bottom and you see the jungle above it, well, the cocaine is made in those labs I just showed you, and then they put it on a boat and they come down. This little town here, his primary focus is cocaine trafficking. You'll see that line, diagonal line, that's an airfield. The FARC, the organization we're going to be talking about, charges $5,000 to drug traffickers who are coming in to get loaded up with cocaine, and then another $5,000 to take off. There's so much U.S. money going on in that town, they don't use Colombian pesos, they use actual U.S. dollars. So you see several of these issues, and this place was noteworthy, and it was involved in our trial. This is another situation in Bogota. I'm going to mention it later, but I spent a lot of time in Bogota, a lot more time than I wanted to, I can tell you that. We found agents, Colombian agents and also DEA, found a wall in an apartment. And so they opened up the wall, and that's what they found. Each one of those are kilos of cocaine that were stored and hidden in the apartment walls. How does it get to the United States? You can imagine, you know this by heart, by ships. Here's a typical example. 8,900 kilograms of cocaine was found on this ship. Here's a fishing vessel, 2,300 kilograms of cocaine. That's what came off that last ship. It's really mind-numbing. It's unbelievable. This is what we call a go-fast boat. And there's all sorts of ways that cocaine's being sent to the United States, and they actually use go-fast boats. You can see the number of engines on this thing. These things really go quickly. And so the Coast Guard and also the U.S. Navy is constantly on the alert to take a look at these vessels. And you can see in this case, the Coast Guard stopped this boat. One of the things I did as an aside when I was at home, well, when I was in D.C., not traveling, is I would be involved in what's called PD 27 calls. It stands for Presidential Directive 27. It was a law that went into effect that basically told us we should meet different agencies when we have a problem with drug trafficking on the highways or in the oceans. And so what would happen is, unfortunately, in the middle of the night, I'd get a call from somebody, and at the Coast Guard headquarters or the Navy headquarters, and they'd say, we're going to convene a PD 27 call. And what that means is that several people are on the line from the State Department, from different agencies, and also State Department, their associates and stuff like that. There's usually 7 or 8, including military officers, on this phone conversation. And my objective and my role was to give them legal advice. So ships were seeing these, Coast Guard ships and the Navy ships were seeing these types of vessels, and they would call and want a PD 27 to say, what legally can they do to stop these vessels? And so it really got involved. And sometimes these meetings would take place on the phone for an hour and a half. These things, what was troubling to me is when I gave legal advice, I was the only one representing the Department of Justice. I gave legal advice. I was always concerned that I didn't give the right one, okay? Because they've recorded my conversations. So fortunately, I never got called and said, what were you thinking, McNeil? Well, why did you give that advice? Go fast boat. Okay, we're going to talk about the FARC. The FARC is the largest cocaine trafficking organization in the world. And what I'm going to show you is going to blow your mind. When I call it a guerrilla army, that's exactly what it was. When you think of a bunch of drug traffickers, you see a bunch of people working together, maybe 20, 30, 40, 100, working to distribute drugs in the United States. The FARC was responsible for producing the cocaine in the jungles. And then drug trafficking organizations would fly into these locations, get the drugs, and then they would determine how to get it back to the United States. But the FARC, F-A-R-C, probably earned or made about $1 billion on this process. You can see in a minute the background. Their initial purpose was to overthrow the Colombian government. And unfortunately, years ago, the Colombian government decided to try to keep peace. And the way of keeping peace is that they gave most of the center part of Colombia land over to FARC control and said law enforcement would never go in there, the army would never go in there. I mean, let's face it, that was really a stupid decision to make because they used all that time and energy to become the largest cocaine trafficking organization in the world. About 20%, maybe 30% of the FARC members were women. Look at this. This is the guerrilla army we're talking about. We're not talking about 100 people with with different means of transporting cocaine in the United States. 16,000 members of this organization, 16,000. And it was my objective after I came up with this plan to go after international drug traffickers, to go after the largest one to start with. And here's, look at this equipment, look at the information that this place would involve. And unfortunately, they would threaten the peasants, the local peasants who were farmers, to grow cocoa plants. If they didn't, they'd say they were going to kill the peasants and their families. So it's a very drastic situation. It's mind-numbing. I mean, when I first got involved in the investigation, I couldn't believe we were dealing with an army. And they're so well-equipped because of all the money they made as a result of selling cocaine to drug trafficking individuals. This happened to be a birthday celebration in Colombia, and what we did, and I'll tell you more about this in a minute, but we had to use former FARC members to testify in our trial. And so those former FARC members that I used as witnesses took these pictures and then gave them to me, and I introduced them in evidence. So what you're seeing now are pictures I introduced to trials. And the equipment is unbelievable. Okay, I just want to mention something about the ships that you saw. When I was a special assistant U.S. attorney in San Juan for a year, I had a case that I thought was probably one of the weirdest cases that I'd ever had. Long story short is that bad guys in San Juan, Puerto Rico would put at the airport cocaine, kilos of cocaine underneath the refreshment carts. You know when you're on a plane and the flight attendants are moving carts? Underneath, they would put 8 to 10 kilos of cocaine. They would call up their buddy in Miami at the airport and say, we got a shipment coming, look at numbers 6, 8, and 10 on flight 840, it's supposed to arrive at a certain time. Those service people would then go in there, grab the cocaine and distribute it. It was just amazing. There's no end to how much time they spend getting it into the United States. I want to mention very quickly about prosecutions of drug trafficking organizations, especially overseas. We have to go after members of the organization to get them to flip, for them to be cooperating witnesses at our trial. And so I would say 80 to 90% of the witnesses we put on in an international case will all come from people who are members of that organization. So they're going after the big dogs. They're testifying in our trials against the leaders of these organizations. And it was always interesting when defense attorneys would call me up and say, my client wants to plead guilty and cooperate with the U.S. government. So I would meet the defendant and the defense attorney in jails all over the place, and I'd have a little conversation with them. So either a DE agent or an FBI agent would be with me, and the focus was on how much did this guy actually know? Is he going to be helpful? Can I use him at trial? And I would say 9 times out of 10, when we had the meeting, the defendant lied, okay? He wasn't really involved in it, and he didn't know what was going on and all this kind of stuff. Well, I won't use the language in front of you that I used with him and his defense attorney, but I think you can imagine it. And I basically said, in different words, after 10 minutes, I said, you have no idea how much we know about you and this organization, so you better start telling us the truth. And I would say to him, I'm going to get up, my agent and I are going to stand outside this room for 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back in. And if you don't start talking and telling us the truth, the next time you see me will be in a courtroom where I intend to prosecute you, find you guilty by the jury, and then sentence you to 30 or 40 years in jail. So that had the effect and it was beneficial. So I'd go back in 10 minutes later, and all of a sudden, this guy's memory could be perfect, and so then we would use them. So if they testified accurately and didn't lie, they would plead guilty, and then they would get a sentencing relief by the judge because of their cooperation. I want to mention how violent drug trafficking is, both in the United States and also in foreign countries. I had a case in Birmingham, Alabama, when I was doing domestic cases, and we were trying a about 10 or 15 people who were using drugs, using it and selling them. Unfortunately, one of our cooperating witnesses, I don't know if he said something, I don't know what happened to him, but the leader of that group decided to go after him, and this is what he did. On a Saturday morning, this witness, cooperating witness, and his 10-year-old son were walking along the street going to a flea market. The leader of this drug trafficking organization pulled up, had two people in his car, they jumped out of the car, they grabbed the cooperating witness, left the kid there, and they went out in the woods. While he was alive, they cut off his fingers. They also cut his tongue in half. Then they beat him with a ballpark hammer. And then they finally, after 3 or 4 hours of that torturing, they shot him in the head. That was a domestic case. That wasn't an international case. I'll give you some examples of cases in Bogota. One of our defendants, and I'll talk about him very quickly in a minute, had a brother and who was in Colombia. Apparently they got wind that he was going to cooperate with us in the United States federal court trial. And they sent a text, not a text, they sent a messenger to the mother of this defendant's brother. They told him, we found your son. Come down to such and such location and you'll be able to see him. They went down, the mother went down to the place to see him, and his body was cut up into 12 different pieces in a cooler. And I saw the pictures. So just really tragic. Another case we had, it didn't have anything to do with the FARC, but we had an issue where an individual pled guilty, and this individual admitted to sending approximately 1 million kilos of cocaine to the United States over a 6-year period. 1 million kilos of cocaine. And I want to just mention very quickly, in Colombia, it costs maybe $1,500 to create a kilo. Once it's in the United States and it's being distributed, they can get $30,000 to $40,000 for that 2 pounds, basically, of cocaine. So this individual pled guilty. Well, I'll start at the beginning. So DEA agents and I interviewed him for 48 hours, and he was very honest with us. He was a very honest person. We could corroborate that from other information we'd received from other people. He thought he made about $3 billion over that 6-year period, and he owned 300 buildings, yachts, cars in Colombia. And we got all that information about it. We turned it over to the Colombian authorities, and that was a big help to him. At one point during my interrogation of him, I said to him, I understand that your wife was murdered. He said, yes. I said, how did that happen? He said, I don't know. And I started to be aggressive with him. I said, what do you mean you don't know? Your wife's murdered and you didn't know? And he started crying. And I said, okay, why? Tell me the truth. He says, I'm telling you the truth. He didn't want to know how his wife got murdered. But some of his colleagues said to him, your wife knows too much about our drug trafficking activities, and if the law enforcement go after her, she's going to be able to testify against you. You need to kill your wife. And so they broke into her house and shot her 5 times. So, okay, how do we start an investigation in Colombia? DEA agents, there's about 40 DEA agents at the U.S. Embassy in Bogota, and they worked with the local Colombian law enforcement authorities, and they would gather information. And as a result, during my trips down there, I went 17 times to Bogota, and probably 7 to 10 days each time. I would talk to the agencies, find out the evidence, find out the witnesses, and then I'd interview the witnesses to determine which ones and how many should I bring to the United States to testify in the trial. The process was slow going because I didn't speak English. I speak Spanish, so I always had an interpreter. So it was a slow going process. But sooner or later, we developed enough people that we thought we could bring them to the United States, they could testify at our trial, and we would have some success. The Colombian Army and the Colombian government was always looking for information to find out these FARC members and where they were. And Tom is going to pass around playing cards. I find this really amazing. I've never come across this in my life. He's passing around so you can all see them. They were actually playing cards with the pictures of FARC members on them, hoping that anybody that was playing cards would see this person and say, hey, I know that guy, or I've seen that guy. It was really quite amazing. I really thought that was unbelievable. Okay, so how do we get these people out of the country of Colombia? We had to prepare a document that was probably 50 pages long. It was a memorandum, and we had to explain in it what the statutes were in the United States, what evidence we had, et cetera. It was about 50 pages. We then gave it to the State Department in Washington, D.C. They sent it to Bogota and to the U.S. Embassy there. People in Bogota turned it over to their counterparts in Colombia. The most difficult thing about this process is it takes like 2.5 to 3 years to get somebody up after we've indicted them. I indicted them in Washington, D.C. before a grand jury, federal grand jury, and it usually takes 2.5 to 3 years. And the problem is that each country has a different rule about letting the United States grab their people and take them to D.C. for a trial or any other place. So we had to convince them in this memorandum that everything was on board. But each one of those individuals we sought to have arrested and extradited to the United States had to go through the legal process within their legal system. In other words, lowest level court up to the highest court. That's why it took so long. And then finally, when the Colombian government said we could take them, DEA agents would fly down, pick them up, and bring them to D.C. As I said, I traveled to Bogota 17 times, and my focus was interviewing FARC members so that I could decide whether I should bring them up or whether I could bring them up, and then talking to the Colombian government. I asked the Colombian authorities for documentation about the FARC. They sent me 50,000 pages of documents, all in Spanish, about the FARC. So I was able to get Defense Intelligence Agency people to summarize and translate that for me. I met with the Attorney General of Colombia and also the Vice President of Colombia. Didn't give him a lot of details, of course, but I talked to him about what was going on. And I talked to him about the problem, that all this cocaine's coming to the United States. And they said something that was perfectly obvious. They said, well, why is the United States using it? If the United States didn't use it, we wouldn't be sending it. We wouldn't be having the cocaine problem. And there's no way that I could have said anything about that. That's absolutely the case. And nothing we could do about that right now. Security was a big issue for me down in Bogota and my trial team. We were driven around in DEA cars, armored vehicles, the highest level of armored vehicles. And because of my background as a Marine Corps officer, they had an M16 for me in their vehicles that I could use. One of the agents said to me, why don't you just take it? I said, I'm going to walk into the hotel with an M16. I'm not authorized to do that. And one thing about the hotels in Bogota, because it is so dangerous there, they lock the doors at 6 o'clock at night. And then they have guards standing out the door to get your identification before they even let you in the building. So we had tremendous concerns about our personal safety and security. Every time I went to Bogota, it was very stressful because of the situation. I'm going to tell you something at the end of my presentation to give you more details about it. But as you drive around Bogota, there would be Colombian Army soldiers with AK-47s because they were always concerned that they were going to be attacked by the FARC members. And so we had to be very careful. A lot of people on motorcycles in Bogota, too, that come up to you and shoot you in your car and drive away. It's hard to find them, hard to get them. On one occasion, while we were in Bogota, we went to a military base, a Colombian Army base. I wanted to see if this colonel would agree to come up and testify in D.C. We entered the entrance point. There was a gate. There were guards there. And we drove about maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Approximately 400 yards away, a car blew up. The FARC members and supporters of the FARC had put bombs and explosive devices in some of these. I'm going to mention to you one. I'm not going to bore you with the death of all the people we brought up to the United States, but one woman, what she did just blew my mind. So I'm in the U.S. Embassy with DE agents, and we're interviewing witnesses. And of course, there's need to be a translator. So one particular day, my agent said, okay, we have one more witness to talk with today. And I said, well, what's her story? He said, well, I'll let her tell you. Okay, so we sat down with her. She sat down. The translators were there, a nice, attractive lady. And this is what happened. When she was 17 years old, her parents had a farm growing crops. And 5 FARC members came up to her and said to the father and to her brother, we're taking you. You're now going to be a member of the FARC. Probably 40 to 50% of the people in the FARC were forced to get in the FARC because of that concerns. And the father and the son said, no, we're not joining the FARC. We don't want to go to the FARC. 5 of those people, 5 of the FARC members, then shot and killed the father and also the son in front of the rest of the family. She was 17 years old. The potential witness was 17 years old. 2 years later, when she's 19 years old, she decides to join the FARC to go after these 5 people. And she spent 5.5 years doing this. Let's assume that, look into this room, the Colombian Army's over here, and the FARC is over here, and they're shooting at each other. She would sneak across those lines on the side of the Colombian Army, and between trees and boulders, she would then shoot one of the members that involved in shooting her parents, her father and her son. She did this for 5.5 years, and after 5.5 years, she finally killed all 5 of the people that killed her father. So I brought her up to D.C. to testify. But then the more I thought about it, I said, I have problems using her as a witness because the defense could really attack this woman because she killed 5 people. I mean, there's no doubt she had a legitimate reason for doing it, but she killed 5 people. The Colombian government gave her immunity, so they would never prosecute. We were never going to prosecute because we didn't have jurisdiction. So at the last moment, I said, I can't put you on the witness stand. She was disappointed about that, but I didn't want anything to really interfere with the case. So when we talked to the witnesses, or potential witnesses in Colombia, we explained to them what they would be required to do. And we said they'd have 2 choices. One choice is that you go in D.C., you testify, and then we send you back to Colombia and we relocate you. And then you'd always have contact with DE agents in Bogota. The other group were people who we explained to wanted and agreed to be part of the Witness Protection Program. I don't know how much you may know about the Witness Protection Program, but in my career I put 15 people in the Witness Protection Program. I'm going to talk a couple of minutes about it because I think it's interesting and you might find it interesting. When we decided that certain witnesses were going to come to D.C. and testify, we did background checks. The agents did background checks with them in Colombia to take a look at the record. We filed a lot of paperwork. We sent it to the U.S. Marshals. The U.S. Marshals are in control of the Witness Protection Program. So we would send this memo to them, and then they would make a decision whether this person qualified to be in the Witness Protection Program. And then we would explain that to that individual what the circumstances were. Once you're in the Witness Protection Program, you cannot have any contact at all with your family or friends back in the country where you came from. None. And the U.S. Marshals make it very clear that if you violate our rules, we're sending you back to Colombia in this case. And so this is what U.S. Marshals do. They bring the people in the program, and they tell them what's going on, and they pay for language, first of all, to get them be able to speak English, and then they try to find them jobs. But here's the most interesting thing. They give them a brand new identity. In other words, they're not what their really names are. They make up names, make up histories for each member that's in the Witness Protection Program. So they have a blank slate. They have to forget everything about them, their names, et cetera, et cetera. One of the times, the biggest problem I had with one of the women, who happened to be a woman witness, her daughter was about 22 years old. She was a nurse in Colombia. She came to the United States in the Witness Protection Program. There was no way she could go back and get documentation that she was a nurse, so she had to start all over again. But it's a very demanding program, and usually they're in the Witness Protection Program for 3 to 4 years. I will then get a call after 3 or 4 years, and the agent, the U.S. Marshal, will ask me if there's any reason why they can't let her out of the program. When they let her out of the program, she still stays in the United States, or the witnesses stay in the United States. They're just on their own. So each month for about, maybe couple of years, until the people in the program are actually settled, the U.S. Marshals pay them about $3,000 a month for their expenses. And then they just move on. But they can't have any contact whatsoever. And as you probably all know, U.S. Marshals are really excellent at taking care of those issues. Just to give you an example, I would have to talk to the witnesses to get them ready for trial, and I would call the marshals up and I'd say, hey, I need to talk to this person. And they said, sir, I'll call you back in another day. They call me back in the other day, and then they would tell me where to fly to. So one witness, a very important witness, I went to 5 different states from Los Angeles to Portland, Maine, to meet the witnesses and talk with them. For those witnesses, well, people in the witness protection program are brought to D.C. for the trial by the U.S. Marshals. We also had people who didn't want to go into it. We created a task force of keeping an eye on the witnesses that we kept in hotels in Northern Virginia. And here's what normally would happen. It sounds like it's a movie, but this is real. They would be in different hotels. We often had people, agents, surveilling them from the hotel, making sure they didn't leave. But we gave them cell phones. And in the cell phones, they had tracking devices. So 24 hours a day, we had a command that actually kept track of all these witnesses so that they wouldn't disappear or go out and do something else. The fear at the time, through the U.S. Marshals and FBI and DEA, was that the FARC would hire people in some of the organized crime gangs, and they would go after our witnesses or go after us. So here's what I would do. If I wanted to meet with somebody, the DEA agents would have a safe house. They would rent a house, not a house, but an apartment or a condo. I would go to a shopping mall, and I would get out of the car, and there'd be a couple of cars of undercover DEA agents, and 2 of them would take me to the place so I could talk to the witness. And there's guards all over the place, as you would imagine. The interesting thing is they also took my car, and they took it to Quantico, and had the FBI check out the security of my vehicle, and they were always looking for some explosive devices or tracking devices that bad guys could have put in my car. That was done many, many times. Okay, last trip to Bogota, I'm going to tell you quickly what was my last time in Bogota. So I usually flew down to Bogota. I would get there about 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I was in the airport. Down in Bogota, like a lot of foreign countries, visitors can't come into the airport, so all the visitors are waiting outside. So I always put my head down because I knew that people knew my name. And so I got my luggage and I walked out. I usually walk about 20 yards, 30 yards to the right to a diplomatic parking lot, and the driver from the embassy would pick me up and take me to a hotel. So I did that. I put my head down, walked over to the car. They picked me up, took me to the hotel. The next morning, I'm in the U.S. Embassy's office, and a federal prosecutor from New York City said, Ron, I knew you were going to come. You were coming in. I said, how in the world did you know I was coming in? Because I never told anybody that I was coming to go to Colombia. He said, well, when I flew in, there was a sign outside that said, Senor Ron McNeil. How do you think I felt at that time? So, long story short, DEA said, you need to go back home. And the State Department said, you need to go back home. I was 6 weeks away from the trial. I said I couldn't go back home. I need to interview these witnesses. So I would be moved from one hotel to the next every day. And I know it sounds probably bizarre, but it was a very dangerous situation. I certainly didn't want to be kidnapped by the FARC. And so when I checked into a hotel, I would make sure I was on the first floor, knew how to break the window in case I had to jump out, and I would put dressers and anything I could in front of the door. I mean, that's very some serious stuff. So that's my last trip. Before I retired, my boss said, Ron, you did such a great job with Colombia. How about working on Mexican cartels now? I said, no, thanks. I said, I would prefer to just play a lot of golf. Okay, so we had the trial. The trial lasted about 6 or 7 weeks. There were about 30 witnesses in total. Most of them did not speak English. It took a long time to take it. This is something really I found interesting. I've never seen this in the 20 years I was a federal prosecutor. The judge in the case, because he was so concerned about the witnesses' security, allowed me to have these witnesses use a different name. So when they testified at trial, it wasn't their real name, with the idea that we're protecting all the witnesses, and that worked out pretty well. All three were convicted, approximately 18 years in jail. The status of the FARC today, I did some research. The FARC entered into a plea agreement, or a safety agreement with the Colombian authorities in 2016. In 2017, the FARC apparently quit. I mean, I don't say apparently, they quit. And so out of the 16,000 members of the FARC, there but 1,500 of them decide not to cave in and take the government's approach to how they're going to be treated. So, but when they did, when the majority of the people, the 16,000, decided to quit, and one of the reasons they decided to quit, frankly, is that when I was, because of the new process I had created of going after bad guys, federal prosecutors around the United States that I talked with and gave advice to were taking many, many, many people out of into the United States. I think they realized we're not going to stop, we're not going to quit. So in August of 2017, the Colombian government seized 8,100 guns, 1.3 million rounds. And then there's that 1,500 that are still not working it out yet and seeing what's going to happen. And one of the problems that we have now with Colombian trafficking and international trafficking is the internet. You know, in the past, we used wiretaps to go after these bad guys, and now they can go online, the dark web and all that kind of stuff, and make deals and talk about stories. For example, they may send an email to somebody and say, I got a car, I'll charge you $10,000. I mean, things that are just sound on the surface, nothing big. But that $10,000, based on their coded language, may be 10,000 kilos, it could be $100,000, it could be anything. So that's all being done through the internet, which makes it a little difficult. I want to just close and give you just a couple of comments. Just had dealing with prosecutions and being a lawyer. People ask me what was the longest trial I ever had. I said it was 3 months in Houston. There were 10 defendants. They got them guilty. But I gave a closing argument that lasted 6 hours. How many of you, don't raise your hand, would want to hear me speak for 6 hours in the closing argument? But I had to because there were 10 witnesses. They also asked me if I've ever been a defense attorney. And I said yes. When I was in the Marine Corps, I represented a sailor who was being charged with murder, and they were going after the death penalty. I won't bore you with the details, but you may want to ask about it down the road. And my client at that time got 7 years in jail. And the other thing that's significant, they asked me, have I ever lost a trial as a prosecutor with the federal government? And I said no, but I had a problem in the Marine Corps. So long story short, this individual was in the Marine, he was a Marine, and he attempted to kill someone. And so the trial was done. 5 years later, I become the chief prosecutor at Quantico. The case has to be retried. I had some issues that were a problem in terms of where was the evidence. I lost the case by 1 vote. There's no unanimous verdict in the military. And the defendant did spend 5 years in jail, but I was really upset and disappointed there. But here's what happened. Somebody decided to write a book about the case. And he wrote a book. And then the next thing I know, he contacts me, the author of the book, and says, there's going to be a TV movie made on this case. So my daughter and I went to Toronto to watch some of the filming of it. So after the actual production of the TV movie, I get a call from, how many of you remember Johnny Cochran, who represented O.J. Simpson? Okay. I get a call from his staff, and they said they wanted to invite me to Los Angeles to talk about the case. And I said, well, I'm a prosecutor now in the federal government. I got cases going on all over the place. Well, we can put you in a TV studio in downtown D.C., and you can talk that way. So I agreed to do that. So I'm on Johnny Cochran's TV show, talking about my reason for why I think this guy is really guilty. And I remember this something, I'll never forget this. Johnny Cochran, during the commercial, said to me, Ron, because you lost the case, does that mean you know that he's innocent? And I said to Johnny Cochran, are you really a lawyer? I said, why do you think I'm here? I'm here to say that this guy is really guilty, and I explained evidence. And so that was one of the crazy things he said. The next thing he said to me, Ron, we've never had a prosecutor who lost a case on our show. Why are you doing it? I said, I'm doing it so I can let people know, the viewers know, that this guy was found guilty, or was guilty even though he won. Okay, so that does it for me. Now I want to hear any questions you might have. Don't be shy.
I have a question.
Okay?
The Colombian government, how is the working relationship with the legitimate government?
That's a good question, and it's gotten better. It's really good now. And I don't remember one time when we asked for an extradition that they didn't grant it. So they've been very helpful because they know they've got a major problem. Yes.
Wait a minute. Oh. Old feet travel slow.
If the FARC has disbanded, well, first off, were they housing all these people? You said it was, I forget how many people, but a lot. Were they housing all these people?
You mean the FARC members?
Yes.
Yes, in the jungles.
I mean, they had barracks and...
Yeah, they had everything. Yes, they were in the jungles, all over the jungles. They were in the area where the Colombian government gave them, this is your land. Do
Right.
whatever you want. We're not going to allow law enforcement or anybody coming in. That was definitely a problem. Yes.
But was it, when they decided to disband, was that sort of take their money and run?
No, when they did, they had a good arrangement with the Colombian government, and they just turned their weapons in, and they were put in a certain program so they could change their brains, and that took place, so that worked. And so it's legitimate. So legitimately, we helped destroy the FARC.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah, so we were really pleased with that.
When you would get a conviction of someone and they'd spend several years in prison, then what would normally happen to them? Would they have to go back to Colombia and then be in danger of being killed by the FARC?
No, you're talking about the defendants?
Yes.
A prosecutor?
Yes, sir.
They would do all their time in the United States prison, and then at the end of that time period, they're sent back to Colombia.
And then who knows what happens then? Huh?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, yes, yes. I was told I get paid by the number of questions I answer.
I'm wondering about how in the world you get in it to witness against the FARC. It seemed like that must have been really difficult to find people to test.
You're absolutely right, and that's why so many people went in the witness protection program. So the marshals do a great job with witness protection. And let me just tell you quickly, make a comment. I love putting witnesses on in the witness protection when I was in trial. So here's what would happen. I'd put a U.S. Marshal on as a witness, and he would testify all about the details about the witness protection program so the jury understood what was going on. And then I would call the actual witness who was in the witness protection program, and he or she entered the courtroom with 2 U.S. Marshals next to him. Now, I can't tell you enough about the security issues. And so we had several agents in the courtroom. We had 15 to 20 DE agents outside the courthouse and every day. And so two marshals walk in, the witness sits down, and the marshals are literally sitting next to him. So in addition to all the protection we had in the courtroom, we had marshals right there. The jury believed, obviously, that this person must be telling the truth because the federal government wouldn't go to this length to bring him in the courtroom.
I want to thank you for putting these programs together for the last couple of years. I know it cost you Thank you.
One last question. Anybody?
And let me say this, I'm going to stand here. If anybody has any questions, they can walk up to me after the presentation.
Thank you. Enjoyed your presentation. I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Certainly.
And you alluded to it earlier regarding we do an excellent job, or I guess we do an excellent job of stemming the supply to some extent, but the war on drugs has been going on ever since I can remember, and the demand is still there. So is all of it, I don't want to say it's an exercise in futility, but are we doing, is legalization
No, not for,
alternative or
that's never,
decriminalization or?
no, that's never going to happen. And I understand your point, and it's a good point. It's a good answer. It's been going on for a long time, but just imagine if we stopped prosecuting. And these drug trafficking organizations just drowned us, our country, with all these drugs. It's a sad commentary that up to 10 million people in the United States are using drugs on a regular basis. But you make a good point. Our attitude is there's got to be a reduction in demand, and we'll keep fighting. We'll keep going after the bad guys.
One last question.
It's not a question, a comment. I'm a second Charlie to you. You've done a great job, and thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's have one more round of applause for Ron. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Thank you.